So I want to start by asking you to imagine that some designer back in 2017 had done this project, transportation in an event of pandemic outbreak. So back in 2017, there was no coronavirus, there was no pandemic. So this project would be considered as a pure speculation, right? Unfortunately, in the year 2020, this speculation has become a reality. And I bet that this project would be the most pertinent, the most important project that any designer would aspire to do. But still, we tend to shy away from doing speculative design projects, uh, not because we are not imaginative enough, but we are too busy fulfilling the dreams of the industry which we are working for. We are in this endless cycle of thinking and discussing about what would the next version of SUV would be, how it will look like, whether it will look like a kangaroo or a cheetah or stingray. So this is what Dunn and Raby, who are prominent figure in the space of speculative and critical design, they say that we designers have become expert fictioneers in denial. We tend to focus all our attention in this narrow, probable business as usual zone, and we tend to ignore the plausible and possible futures, the things that could happen, might happen, and if they do happen, how would we live our life? And there are many tools of imagining plausible and possible future. This is one of it, where you are presented with set of cards, social, technical, ecological, economical, and political cards, and you tend to imagine a plausible future. It is important to note that we are not pinpointing or predicting the future, but we are, in a way, want to imagine alternate scenarios. To that point, my project, Mobility Provocation, gives designer an approach, a practice, and a framework to activate futures, and in the process, create knowledge repository, a repertoire of future discourses. And I'm going to explain this project by covering these four territories. First of all, what is this speculative approach we are talking about? I'm going to introduce you to the toolkit and the framework. And I'm going to tell you how I applied this approach, toolkit, and the framework through a provocation, uh, meandering in an autonomous vehicle future, and how do we unearth the data attitudes in the information civilization. So starting with the approach, so my project aligns to speculative design, but it also departs in certain ways. So speculative design is a medium to explore alternate futures, and in the process generate questions about the present rather than providing answers. And it is different from traditional design, which we usually do. So traditional design provides answers. Speculative design asks questions. Traditional design thinks about application. Speculative design thinks about implications. Traditional design is about innovation. Speculative design is about provocation. Traditional design makes us into our consumers, users, and makes us buy. To Nishan's point, when he said like there are not enough customers, which is very pertinent because there is a economic implications to traditional design. But speculative design keeps us think, and keeps us a citizen. It makes us think about rhetorics, ethics, and authorship of experience. And speculative designers, they make speculative artifacts. As you can see that none of these artifacts, they are meant for production. They're not meant to provide answers. They are meant to leave us audiences with more questions and more possibilities. And this is how speculative design, this is how my project aligns to speculative design, but speculative design is not perfect. There are critics of speculative design, which says that idea of speculation, it remains with the expert. For example, if I'm a speculative designer, I will design a speculative artifact, which is based upon my imagination, my rendition, and my vantage point, which is a very expert-centric top-down approach of doing things. So in my project, I have taken this 4-point approach, which I'm going to explain schematically through this diagram. Point number 1, so like I said, like speculative designers, they design speculative artifact, they put it on the pedestal with the hope of raising awareness. So in this project, I have made people as speculators by giving them an apparatus of speculation, therefore bringing them in the forefront of the design process. This project breaks the designer vantage point by making it more participatory. In a usual discourse, designers imagine plausible scenarios and they design artifacts. In this case, designers shape people's speculation in order to make artifacts. And this entire process is a generative and iterative process. So not only people are making speculations, but it also provides the designer a generative way of making artifacts. So this is the ground approach which I have employed in this project. When I say activating futures, it is not only about giving people a medium of speculation, but also raising awareness about some of the pressing issues about known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And this apparatus which I'm talking about is the Actify toolkit, right? So this is where I want to introduce you the Actify toolkit. So Actify toolkit has a set of ingredients, and you use those ingredients to make a recipe, right? So it has a sandbox, sand, miniature sand props, cards, cultural probes, but it also has a white room. So essentially, you play with these miniature pieces in the sandbox, and then you move to a white room where you enact and role play all your experiences on a life-size scale. So Actify embodies this important quote by Dunn Raby, which says that help people construct compasses rather than giving them prescriptive maps in order to navigate new sets of values. So on similar line, Actify also give designers and participants ingredients so that they could imagine new worlds and not base their imagination based upon the current status quo of the current world. So the materiality of the sand, right? So it surpasses the cultural and geographical boundaries. We all have played with sands when we were kids. These miniature props, they are meant to be metaphorical so that people can create and assign roles and agency to this miniature props. It has a set of cards which enable you to make themes. It has a set of covert cards and overt cards. It has another card which is called as poster from the future. And it has a dice so that designers can also write keywords on this dice pertaining to their own project. So dice adds contingencies to the world which participants are building. It also has a set of influencers card which is based upon the primary research. So Actify, like I said, it's a recipe of building plausible and possible worlds by theme building, world building, and role playing. And it is important to note that in my project, I have used Actify toolkit at point number 3, 4, and 5 after doing my primary research. And this is where I want to introduce to the framework which I have designed. So I designed this framework partly at Honda R&D Americas with 2 groups, and I further validated this framework at Art Center College of Design with 4 to 5 groups. So essentially, this framework has 2 axes. It moves from real world to plausible world on x-axis and understand to critique on the y-axis, which divides this diagram into 4 quadrants. It also has checkpoints. It tells you what kind of output you are expecting, whether the process is participatory or not. So in the first quadrant, when you understand the real world, you do real world research. In the second quadrant, when you understand the plausible world, you will be able to do plausible research, and it will help you to make plausible themes. And the best way to critique a plausible theme is to build a world, right? To test it out. And then you take these plausible themes and then you materialize these into artifacts in quadrant number 4. And all of these circles, they represent time. So the closer you are to the center, it is more towards present and now. And as you move towards the periphery, you're moving towards a possible and a plausible world. And this animation will give you a better idea. So as you're moving towards the periphery, you are indulging into a more future-centric experimental research. And this is common in all the quadrants. In plausible theme building, as also you're either making a fantasy theme or closer to a reality theme. In the 4th quadrant artifact as well, are you making a plausible artifact or a design fictional artifact or a fantasy artifact? And this is one of the way of using this framework. So this is how you can do it. So you can do ethnographic research, experimental research, you can make plausible themes, do plausible world building, come up with artifacts, and it's a generative and iterative process. So you can keep on doing it again and again to increase your knowledge repertoire. So this is how I used this framework. So I started at the center with the theme, conducted a real world ethnographic research, psychogeography. I invited participants to build themes. They did scenario role playing and translated all of these into artifacts. So I started with the theme, how might we meander in an autonomous algorithmic future? So I started with this question that why we are moving towards a future of point A to B travel, because travel historically was not so focused and standardized. We were always exploring, discovering new places and places. But the current day of Uber, and Waymo, they want us to travel from origin to destination. So I was like questioning that narrative, like why is it so? So I conducted ethnographic research. The research is called as psychogeography. It's about discovering new spaces and places and how do we feel emotionally and psychologically. So as participant to meander without any motive or intention in their mind. I synthesized the research. I came up with insights, principles, and value criteria of meanderers. So these were the attitudes and dispositions of meandering: discovery, agency, tactics, fear, inquiry, precarity, contingencies. And I found that all of these dispositions of meandering, they were in contradiction of the dominant narrative of autonomous vehicle travel, which was about algorithm, logic, efficiency, optimization, predictability, repeatability, and set of instructions. And these custodians of this autonomous vehicle travel are these data-driven transportation companies, right? Which have their proprietary algorithm, which we do not know anything about. And socio-technical commentators, they have been warning us about the algorithmic bias, right? So big data processes, they do not codify the past. They do not invent the future. They only codify the past. And Shoshana Zuboff, who is a professor at Harvard, she has written an amazing book called as Surveillance Capitalism. I highly encourage you to read it. She says that Pokemon Go, we thought that it was just a game, but it manipulated us to go to pizza joints and restaurants so that these restaurants, they can increase their footfall and implicitly increase their revenues, right? Waymo, which is a subsidiary of Google, they're already quantifying human behavior, whether you're conservative, aggressive, slow walker, fast walker, and so on and so forth. Allstate Insurance, which is an insurance company, they can remotely switch off your car ignition if you do not pay your insurance regularly. So which is very scary because your agency and your freedom has been taken away in very different ways altogether. So there was this dichotomy, and I really wanted to inquire this dichotomy, and I used Actify Toolkit to do so by theme building, world building, and role playing. So I invited participants, I gave them certain roles. I used the cultural probes. I used dice and influencer cards, and asked them to enact all of these scenarios in the white space, where they use all of these props and come up with different scenarios and discussion and conversations. So currently we are at this phase. So at the end of the presentation, I inquired the participant how they feel about it. And most of the participants, they were getting aware about the data bias and operation through this Actify toolkit. So group number one, they build the themes on data equity, data inequity, and transportation. Group two, they were about how to manipulate data for travel patterns. Group three discussed about data injustice, disaster and transportation credit, and access to services. So there were a lot of conversation, a lot of provocations, and I converted all of these conversation to artifacts. To be precise, these were the conversation attributes. So there were reverence about mobility data centers, there were data justice code, data ownership and mobility benefits, data banks and secure zones, which led me to design of the first artifact, predestination. So I'm not going to spend much time on discussing these artifacts, just quickly for the sake of time. So this is a device which predicts your future travel behavior, like where you will travel, why you will travel, how you will travel, with whom you will travel. So it's a ledger of the future of your transportation, invoice basically. So if you own this document, you are the owner of your future, right? And the way these copies are functioning, they're selling your data. So essentially, this device lets you become the owner of your own data, and so that you could sell it. And why should corporates make all the profit? It's your data, and you should make your own profit, right? So second artifact is about data movement. So conversation attributes were transportation credit, fear of judgment, there are corridors of privileges, and how can you have new personality for new benefits? So movement data washer essentially is a symbolic and emblematic place, just like you have religious place where people can go and wash their sins and assume a new identity. This is a place where people can, purge their data, transportation data, and assume a new identity for, socioeconomic movement in a way. So the next artifact is about data kinopolitics. So kinopolitics means politics of movement, and it's usually attributed to migrants. So it is about conspicuous and ubiquitous data operators, data collectors, and how would you assume a new identity for safety? So data kinopolitics is about rise of a new generation of data extractors who scavenge bits and bytes through their continuous movements. So these are the lowest people in the socioeconomic strata who scavenges bytes and bits in order to survive for the daily life. So these are the artifacts. So I not only synthesize it to make artifacts, but also did affinity mapping. And this led me to discovery of the new attitudes and discourses around data and transportation. So essentially, either you distrust the data-driven transportation companies or you depend upon them. And in due course, you become an activist or you become a conformist. For example, you distrust a transportation company, but you're doing something about it, right? Then you essentially are a vigilante or a revolutionist, right? But if you are distrusting them, but you're doing nothing about it, then you probably are data minimalistic or you have a I don't care attitude. But you are like helplessly dependent upon them for your socioeconomic movement, then most likely you are data oppressed. And if you're dependent upon the transportation companies and you're getting some sort of benefits, then you're data evangelist or a loyalist. So I showed these artifacts to the participants and I generated even more data attitudes and discourses, which are appended onto this diagram over here. So at this point of time, I want to take a pause and take you back to the first slide of the pandemic outbreak of 2017. So I'm doing this project in 2020, right? So let's imagine that there is a huge data breach at Uber or Waymo in the year 2023. So in that case, what would Waymo do, right? So they know that there will be a huge revolt. There will be resistance and boycott of their services. But they cannot go to the user or people to know how they will react, right? Because that is now it happens. We cannot like tell people, okay, imagine that there is a data breach and now tell us how do you feel. So that is why I feel that this project is of great importance because it lets people to speculate, to get them in the scenarios and environments and become actors of that scenario to get an informed decision. So in that case, Waymo would know that, okay, let's manipulate the attitudes to a conformist, right? So that they have data minimalist attitude, or probably they can think about having third-party data banks. So even if there's a data breach, they can wash their hands clean and nobody would blame them. So, so the point is that this framework and this active toolkit helped me generate new knowledge resources around future discourses. And this is an iterative process, right? So I have took one set of participants, but there could be like multiple set of participants, like people from, data management or elderly people or kids who are like data minimal. So there could be like iterative process and generative process of having more artifacts and more knowledge about how people will react to these future scenarios. And then this framework can also be used to map the artifacts onto this diagram, how close these artifacts are closer to the reality, or are they towards the future, or plausible and possible scenarios. So to conclude, I want to say that the artifacts on the left are made by me, but they are made by a different process. There's a process called as futures triangle. So I showed these artifacts to the participants, and I did get a response. Without getting into the details of the response, but I want to say that how I'm getting the response of the central idea of this project of data bias and discrimination. So this response was expressed by the participant in the quarter number 4. But in Actify Toolkit, this response was not only expressed, but this response was also exercised and experienced through Actify Toolkit. So which is really important for me as a designer because I want to make people more aware about the discourses and the discrimination that's going on, not only by observing, but also intervening and exercising and experiencing the data bias in itself, not by just watching a documentary on Netflix. If you have seen the documentary Social Dilemma, so we are just observing, just watching the social dilemma, and just we are reacting to it. but Actify actually puts people into those scenarios. They become actors, they become agents, and they experience this data bias by themselves, which is a more valuable thing, in my opinion. So to conclude, so Actify Toolkit essentially was a participatory toolkit to reimagine plausible and possible world. It raised awareness about data bias and transportation, like I said in the beginning, about about imagining new futures, not only giving them a scenario to imagine futures, but also raising awareness in a way. It also allows Actify also allows designers to shape people's speculation to make conceptual artifacts. It also enables a generative and iterative process for data bias and transposition, and whichever project which you are working on. And in a way, it also open the door for traditional designers to use alternate methods like speculative design and make it more approachable in a way for you to use it in your own projects in a way. So I would like to stop at that and open the floor for discussion. Really want to thank you for inviting me for this presentation. Uh, this was a brilliant platform to share my ideas and get a response from you about different methods and kind of provocations you might think of. Thank you so much.